This is the James Crepea Show.
We've got a blind date with destiny.
And it looks like she's ordered the lobster.
Oregonian columnist James Crepea.
I had some crackpot dynamite reporter at the first press conference ask me how in the heck we're going to possibly throw the ball when they keep a lid on their covers and who's the best pass rusher you've ever played against.
We're not the favorites. We're the other guys.
KORE 1050 and 95.7. Fox Sports Eugene. Here is the James Crepea Show, presented by Dairy Mart.
Hit the lights and lock the doors. Welcome, everybody, to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. I am James Crepea, the Oregon Ducks beat reporter for the Oregonian and Oregon Live, where you can find all my work covering the Ducks on a daily basis. And that is where we start today's show, as usual. Thankfully, we can get back to the main college realm on the day today. We start with, first and foremost, the injury updates on Juwan Johnson and Cam McCormick. Mario Cristobal gave us an update after this morning's practice.
From an injury standpoint, Juwan is still day-to-day and going to make a decision more towards Friday, Saturday, see how he's doing. I think Cam is a little bit behind him. I think Cam will be more of a next-week decision, Cam McCormick. With that being said, I think you guys saw Schuler's already running on land, probably and doing a lot of the stuff in there on that Ultra G, with about 80 to 90% of his body weight. So certainly that's encouraging that he's on schedule, a little bit ahead of schedule.
So the big takeaways there, Juwan Johnson, day-to-day, maybe not exactly a game-time decision. Decision could be made ahead of time. Obviously, we will look to see on Saturday with a late game with a 7:45 kick. And I've even seen it listed somewhere at 7:55, which would be really awful. Let's hope it stays close to 7:45. 7:45 kick. Anything that goes on in the hours before and in pregame, where last week he did not even – it was basically the same as the week before. He did not even remotely go through pregame other than in a sweatsuit. Did not go through much of anything. So we'll look to see if he does that for the first time. He has been practicing this week. To what extent? We're not there watching. We're not allowed in anymore, so couldn't tell you if he's limited or whatnot, but he is practicing. To what extent? Unclear. But day to day, that remains that way for him, but it sounds like he's at least inching closer, whereas Cam McCormick, not sure exactly if there's been a setback, which would certainly be rather disappointing, but ultimately, one way or another along this process, and I followed up with Mario after he mentioned those various injury updates, this has got to be getting a little bit concerning with McCormick because he's missed what's going on now nearly 7 weeks because he missed all of fall camp by way of active participation. Yes, he's been out there every day. He's been limited, but he has not been running with the offense in the practices that we saw in fall camp at all. And obviously he's missed the games. Now, before the Auburn game, before the season opener, he at least went through the pregame drills. Now, again, could that have all been a bit of showmanship and that they very well could have known he absolutely wasn't going to play, and that was just to give an idea to Auburn that perhaps, maybe, just possibly he could go out there? I guess, sure. Ultimately, he didn't play, so I suppose it could have been some gamesmanship, but he looked pretty good.
Yeah.
And that was a week and a half ago. Well, now, and he could be a week plus away. Now, I understand, look, this week, you're not going to push guys to get on the field this week. Oregon does not need Juwan Johnson or Cam McCormick or Brendan Schooler or Micah Pittman in order to beat Montana by 40. That's just the way it goes. However, this is more to the greater issue of, hey, Cam McCormick has been out and not taking part in stuff on a full participation basis in a long time here. And that's got to be a bit concerning in general. Mara basically said, hey, look, it is what it is. We're not going to rush a guy out there, especially a guy like Cam who's not coming into this 100% in the first place, in the sense that obviously he dealt with an injury last year. Now, he didn't get into specifics, but he had said there were some things that Cam had that made the recovery, he called it complicated. Now, could it be the fact that he obviously had a leg injury last year, and that was part of it? Sure, certainly. Could be. But again, there was a little bit of exactly the details weren't exactly there. But bottom line, look, this is a team that could definitely benefit from Cam McCormick being on the field. Wouldn't make a huge impact necessarily this week against Montana, and you definitely want him for as much and all of Pac-12 play as you can get. And if it ends up being 1 week later for Stanford, you're thrilled. If it has to go through the bye week and it ends up being 4 games, but he gets it for Cal, all right. But mercy, this young man has been dealing with an injury that now is lasting. Again, it would start a fall camp. It was, okay, he's going to be limited with a ankle before camp, but it should be a couple of weeks. And a couple of weeks has now grown to, we're at 6 weeks, could be 7 weeks. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of time. So just disappointing for him, I'm sure, because I know he's been chomping at the bit to really get back on the field. You got to remember, this guy got hurt week 1, basically virtually missed the entirety of last season. Played in 1 game and got hurt in the season opener. So he has not been on a field in a competitive situation outside of the spring game, which I just don't count, for over a year. So you know that he's got to be just, like I say, just chomping at the bit, especially last week. The entire tight end core, outside of Patrick Herbert, who played but didn't record a catch, everybody else played a huge role. You know that Cam McCormick would have been a huge part of that. And you know that he would have been a weapon in the game against Auburn. So disappointing for him that there's been this, whether you want to call it a setback or whether it's just a general delay in the recovery process. Bottom line, it's disappointing for him, but we'll see with Juwan Johnson on Saturday. Elsewhere, personnel update-wise, Mario said that Zach Emerson is just away from the program, that being the walk-on kicker who was arrested earlier this month on a couple of misdemeanor charges. We talked about that briefly yesterday. We'll see. Obviously, Emerson has a court date in Eugene Municipal Court sometime next week. So depending on that and how that goes and other things, we'll see exactly as to the timeline and whatnot. Now, Oregon does have, first and foremost, it has Cam Lewis, the true freshman who is handling all the kicking. He's handling kickoffs. He's handling field goals. It would only be truly concerning by way of lack of general depth at the kicking position if he was also handling punting, which does exist. I mean, that happens at some places where one guy does handle all 3 things, and that's a lot in any one game for a kicker to have to handle. In particular, if you ever run into a game where you're punting a lot, then you're really in a tough spot. But that's not the case here. Mamon's handling the punts. Tom Snee is still on roster, though he has not punted so far this season. And though Adam Stack has left to transfer, and now Emerson is away from the program, they do have a couple of other walk-on kickers who are taking part in practice and whatnot. So in the event of disaster, there are other options. Now, obviously, you hope nothing happens to Camden Lewis, and ultimately, kickers, generally speaking, are not generally thrown into too many abundantly physical situations, but on occasion with kickoff coverage and stuff. But I would venture to guess that they're very much telling Cam Lewis to avoid tackles and contact on kickoffs in particular. And obviously on field goals, you're not worried about that much at all other than running into the kicker or something a little bit like that. Speaking of Adam Stack, asked Mario about, obviously, with Stack's decision to leave and venture elsewhere. That does open up a scholarship. Oregon now at 84 on paper projected because, again, the school year doesn't start until October 1st. Obviously, with the team, you can once play already starts, you can only carry 85 regardless, but the school year doesn't start until October 1st. So with a open scholarship, has he made a decision yet is what he wants to do and how he wants to allocate that? He said he had not. Oregon would seemingly, and again, we have to project it, folks. We don't know exactly who's on paper, but assuming based on who was on scholarship and who signed on in the various signing classes, et cetera, it would seem that Ryan Bay, who had been on scholarship previously at tight end, and Mamone, who had been on scholarship previously, I can't remember if it was last season or the year before, I think it was the year before, would be 2 prime candidates potentially. That doesn't mean that they are or they aren't. I don't know. Because in a subsequent follow-up question to the transfer portal, now that there are more players entering into it again, because it's after a couple of weeks, and I guarantee you will see more of it next week, and especially the week after week 4, where in particular, like in this state, with Oregon and Oregon State, where school starts October 1st, like I say, the term has not begun yet for the quarter system I think you will see once that first day of class starts, the very next day, players may then suddenly ask to enter the portal and potentially save themselves a redshirt year. And I'm not talking about from either team. I'm talking about in general with quarter schools that are starting on October 1st because of the calendar of when things are happening.
But you're going to see guys.
That happens everywhere. It happens across the country.
There's going to be at least a couple guys from each school.
Everybody does it everywhere. I'm not trying to predict who would do it at either Oregon or Oregon State. I have no knowledge to where anybody's thought process is to that. I'm saying that expect it everywhere because that's just the nature of the sport right now.
Yeah.
It came up because obviously we can't ask Mario about other players, but USC wide receiver Devin Williams, a former top 20 recruit in 2018 who picked USC over Oregon, entered the portal today.
Ooh.
And that is obviously drawing quite a bit of interest across the entire Pac-12 and et cetera. So while we obviously cannot ask about a specific player who, even if they're in the portal, another player on another team, even if they're no longer with that team and in the portal, because it's still a recruit at that point. The question was essentially, with the portal, do you have to look at it during the season, during the first couple of weeks? And Mario said, of course, you have to, which is something that he said last year, too, by the way. He said the exact same thing. But the follow-up there was, do you look to carry an open scholarship for those sort of situations? And he said, you always look to carry one. Now, here's the thing, at least with the Devin Williams situation specifically, because he has played for USC, unless he were to transfer down, and I don't even think that works. In fact, I'm almost positive that doesn't work. Once you play, you may be able to redshirt and use the redshirt rule to your benefit now, but you can't transfer and then play for another team.
So you've got to sit out the full year.
Correct.
Okay. Even if you've played
there's
one
no
snap.
waivers anymore. One snap. Once you've appeared in a game.
Okay.
In the course of the competitive season, once you have played in a game, you cannot transfer and have immediate eligibility somewhere else.
So if they were to pick up this guy, it would
them or anybody else. Anybody else if he goes anywhere else in the Pac-12.
Right, but I mean, if he were to come to Oregon, there's no way he's going to
play this season.
It's no way he's going to be able to fill that need at receiver.
Not in the 2019 season
at all.
No,
so
not in 2019. Now that doesn't mean he can't agree to join the program starting in December for bowl practices and then spring practice thereafter. But no, he would not be able to play in 2019. He has already played for the Trojans, so that's why in the course of the conversation about scholarships and the one being open, and what do you do, and do you try to carry one? Now, they may try to carry one for just in general other purposes. Mm-hmm. And like I say, they can ultimately make a decision. They have quite a few weeks here. And like I say, the next couple of weeks, there will be more movement across the country. So with one open, most programs try to keep one open. That's not unusual. But ultimately, there comes a point in the season when you find the one or two or how many openings you have on your particular team, and you award them to walk-ons accordingly, and everything works out. So that's why I wasn't expecting Mario to have a decision made necessarily on how he wanted to do that. But we asked today because I didn't know. You asked because I wasn't expecting him to have a definitive answer. He didn't. Okay, but for all I know, he did. So you ask. So that's everything by way of personnel. For Oregon today's guest on the program, we will have Jason Kersey of The Athletic. He covers Oklahoma. We're having him on because Oklahoma is set to take on UCLA at the Rose Bowl on Saturday. It will be a showcase game for Jalen Hurts and the Oklahoma defense in particular, and the wide receiver corps, because I'm venturing to guess that there will be many, 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 many more Sooners fans at the Rose Bowl. Probably as many as there were when they played Georgia in the Rose Bowl in the playoff semifinals a couple of years ago. Then there will be Bruins fans at the Rose Bowl because they literally are giving tickets away for the poor Bruins fans. They're giving away tickets. They're already having players-only meetings. Oof. Chip Kelly is having to defend everybody, but Steve is still picking them to do just about everything.
Right.
Steve is holding out faith.
No,
he's telling you to take UCLA and the points.
Not this week.
Oh, okay.
Not this week.
We'll have Jason on at 4:30. At the top of the 5 o'clock hour, we will have Cyd Zeigler of Outsports. He wrote a story earlier today on UC Irvine coach Russell Turner, who obviously Oregon fans know well from the second round of the NCAA Tournament, and his comments to Lewis King throughout that game, and then in the post-game press conference that drew much criticism, deserved criticism. I and others who were there immediately jumped on it that night once he said that he was referring to Lewis King as Lewis Queen. And throughout the game, he tried an explanation to say that it was an analogy to chess. Obviously, that did not go over well across the board. We'll talk to Cyd Zeigler on his story and speaking with Russell Turner at length. It was quite a lengthy story. You can check it out on Outsports. But we'll speak with him at the top of the 5 o'clock hour. Later in the 5 o'clock hour, we will have on Frank Gogola of the Missoulian. He covers Montana, so obviously there is not exactly a plethora of folks who cover FCS football, but Montana being one of the better programs, they do have a beat reporter at the Missoulian. And we will speak with Frank about the Grizz, who are set to come in as monumental underdogs. Though they are, again, at the FCS level, they are more than respectable program. They're actually quite good at the FCS level, but they are clearly very overmatched against the number 15 team in the country with the Ducks. But we'll have Frank on at 5:30. We are also giving away, as we did yesterday, a pair of tickets for this Saturday's game for Oregon State and Cal Poly. And today we will include a parking pass. So we have a pair of tickets and a parking pass for you for Saturday's game, Oregon State, Cal Poly. Keep listening. We'll let you know when we will when to call us on the Davis Roofing Hotline at 541-343-KORE and when you can win those tickets. And just like yesterday, if you would like to know exactly what time ahead of time, you can follow me on Twitter at James Crepea, that's CREPA, or the station, Court 1050 Eugene. Ask us, when are you giving away the Oregon State tickets? And we will tell you. So you are prepared ahead of time. So you know. Maybe you get a leg up when we ask for the fifth caller at a time later in the program. You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. A particularly big story in the college sports world came out earlier today on Yahoo Sports from friends of the program, Pat Forty, Pete Thamel, and Dan Wetzel. This being a transcript that had a transcript of a former Arizona assistant coach, Book Richardson, who is facing a 3-month sentence as a result of that trial. This regarding a conversation involving references to paying $40,000 to have a high school coach, a quote-unquote high school coach, to help ensure that the academic eligibility of former Wildcats player Raleigh Alkins, and this is during his recruitment. This is some of the conversation and transcript. This was previously not played in court. It's unclear exactly why that was the case, but nevertheless, there are multiple references in the course of this transcript conversation which came up in court records and documents. Here's some of the references from Emmanuel Book Richardson, again, former Arizona assistant caught up in the FBI scandal in college basketball. Speaking here. So, again, it is something different each year, Richardson said, generally referencing how to financially support recruits' families. Quote, it is, like I said, $40,000 to do that was totally extreme. If I had the chance to do it all over again, I would not do it. I'd try to barter something. I'd give blood. I'd give, let's just call it another bodily fluid, something. So that's in first reference to of many to this alleged $40,000 payment Richardson was discussing and that he allegedly made to, again, this quote-unquote high school coach of Alkins to make him eligible and help change in the transcript of this recruit from the New York area. He played at Christ the King, which is a famous New York Catholic school, just powerhouse in Queens, New York. I mean, every year the Christ the King boys basketball program is universally, pretty much, I think every year for time immemorial, is a powerhouse program. However, he also went on to play at an academy post-grad or post-secondary, whatever you want to call it, generally speaking, due to academic eligibilities when those things pop up, in Raleigh, North Carolina. He also This conversation with undercover agents resolved around a course at Bishop Ford High School in Brooklyn, which closed in 2014, earlier in Alkin's career. I believe I actually covered a game there once many moons ago, or at least covered Bishop Ford at one point. I can't remember if I was ever there, to be honest. This is going back a ways. Point is, this was not exactly unheard of in the college recruiting world, I'll say. And it was also known with Alkins that he was facing some challenges as to academic eligibility as a recruit, because I covered a player who played on his AAU team, and there was questions at the time of, oh, well, is Alkins going to follow him, because that'd be two really good recruits at one time? And the answer I was getting at the time was, yeah, he probably won't qualify. So I said, oh, okay. And then it was, and then they're not that close either. So, all right, well, then don't worry about it. Elsewhere in this conversation, Richardson said the coach told him, quote, I need $40,000 to get this class, is what they're referring to, on his transcript. If he does not get this class, he's going to be a partial qualifier. He's not going to have 16 credits to graduate, and the NCAA requires completion of 16, what they call the core curriculum classes, for immediate eligibility. So Richardson goes on to say, he calls it an ingenious plan by this high school coach. He had, quote, he had the school seal, and the great thing about the seal that he had, the school in Bishop Ford closed down in Brooklyn, so you can't investigate. So when the NCAA says, I need to see the coursework and all, the school's closed.
That makes sense.
Again, continuing, because it's not just me doing it, I got to take care of some people. Again, continuing, the high school coach, again, it was ingenious. But when you bamboozle everybody and that kid didn't get any of that 40, that's the problem I have. So, and there was subsequently in this story, you can read the full story on yahoo.com. I'm not going to read the whole thing on air. Bottom line, this was a pretty big story, to say the least, in what is already just a deluge of things going on at Arizona. The latest now including potentially academic fraud. Add that on top of everything else that could come up. And those would also be level 1 violations, potentially, allegedly. And there were no comments from Arizona, Sean Miller, lawyers, etc., in response to this story. So something to keep an eye on in the mounting and monumental amount of things going on with the fallout of that case. And the NCAA is supposedly very much aware of this. Prior to this transcript getting out today, they had asked another, now former, Arizona assistant about it in the course of their questioning. So the NCAA was aware of this. And in their course of investigating Arizona specifically, they are very much aware of this particular alleged payment.
So they can use this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But
now again, the rest of it being that that as we talked about last week, that the Southern District and the various different investigative documents are not being provided to the NCAA. This was something that the NCAA was already aware of.
Okay.
So this was something that was already come up. Now, any which other thing, and in particulars, who knows whether they have it or not, but at least with this particular allegation and this particular piece of transcript regarding this alleged $40,000 payment to a high school coach to, in some way, amend, doctor, alter, whatever you want to call it, the transcript of then recruit Raleigh Alkins, who played for Arizona in 2016-17. Yes, they were aware of it, but check out the story on Yahoo Sports from Pat Forty, Pete Thamel, and Dan Wetzel on that. Coming up, we will chat with Jason Kersey of The Athletic. You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. And we welcome to the program our first guest of the day, Mr. Jason Kersey of The Athletic, covers the Oklahoma Sooners. You can follow him on Twitter at Jason Kersey. Welcome to the program, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with your latest star quarterback that you get to cover and Heisman contender you get to cover. Jalen Hurts, former SEC Offensive Player of the Year, loses a starting job, helps win an SEC championship game once Tua Tagovailoa goes down, and takes off to Oklahoma. It was quite a nice send-off, quite frankly, from Alabama. And he walks in and just becomes very quickly, the latest, greatest quarterback at Oklahoma. anything even remotely surprising to you? I mean, on one hand, you knew that he'd do pretty well, but I would imagine 6 touchdowns week 1 had to be pretty awe-inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising that he's. I mean, I say surprising. I mean, I figured he'd be good. I mean, he's a good player. He was the SEC Offensive Player of the Year. He is a very capable quarterback. But the way that he sort of stepped in and immediately put up these unbelievable numbers. I mean, his numbers in week 1. And yes, I know Houston is not a good defense. And certainly neither is South Dakota, the defense he played last week. But the numbers that he put up were just, I mean, ranked among some of the best performances in OU history. I mean, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jason White, Sam Bradford played some bad defenses, and none of them ever put up numbers quite like that, both in terms of passing and rushing. So it's been pretty unbelievable. It's been fun. I mean, he certainly at this stage looks like he'll, at the very least, be making a trip to New York in early December.
I would bet very strongly towards that, at least as a finalist, because, yes, the Big 12 defenses, such as they are, and the Oklahoma offense, the way it is, it would take something truly extraordinary to imagine Jalen Hurts not being invited because, he's going to be facing a lot of defenses that are not very good, including this week against UCLA of the Pac-12, which is why we have you on joining us out here on the West Coast, because it will be quite the showcase game as Oregon and Oregon State are both playing FCS teams, and Oregon playing particularly late on Saturday night. A lot of Ducks and Beavers fans will be watching around the country. This will be one of those prominent games. And I imagine when they drew this series up for Oklahoma and UCLA that they weren't imagining that UCLA would be in quite the scale of rebuild that they are, because this is going to end up being just barring a miracle of biblical proportions, a absolute onslaught and slaughter back-to-back years by the Sooners over the Bruins. Anything you've gotten by way of, from your audience, Jason, of just, is there something a little bit, I don't want to say missing, but this could have been a pretty big non-conference series, and on paper it looks that way, but because UCLA has been so lacking last year and this year, is there almost like a little bit of a disappointment? Is there anything that you're hearing from Oklahoma fans about an unwillingness to go out to the Rose Bowl again after being there for the semifinal a couple of years ago? Because it's a big cost to fly out there. Is there a little disappointment there?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, that's sort of the nature, though, of college football scheduling, right? I mean, you schedule these games a decade in advance. I mean, I don't have it right in front of me, so I'm not exactly sure what UCLA's program looked like whenever this game was scheduled. But, I would imagine that it wasn't like this. And, I mean, that's why it's sort of funny. Oklahoma has a game. I can't remember the exact years, but they have like a game on the schedule with Clemson for like 2035 or something. And I'm like, Lincoln Riley and Dabo Swinney might neither one still be there, and those programs might be nothing like they are today by that point. So it's kind of just the nature of this stuff. You have no idea what these things are going to look like when these games are scheduled so far in advance. But I mean, I don't think as many people will make the trip for this as they did for the actual Rose Bowl, which it makes sense, and that would probably be the case even if UCLA was a pretty good team this year. That's one thing I'm sort of, I went to the Rose Bowl 2 years ago, and I was there for that epic game. It was an amazing game. It was a packed house. There's not a better stadium that I've ever been to than that one. And it was so cool. And I'm thinking, the mountains and the view and the natural beauty and all that will still be there. But this is going to be quite different in terms of I don't imagine there'll be very many UCLA fans there. It's not going to be a close game. And because UCLA is just much more of a train wreck, I think, than anybody would have imagined they would be going into year 2 of Chip Kelly. But that's the way it is.
Fans will obviously be watching Jalen Hurts for sure. But for Pac-12 fans who will be watching this game while it's at least competitive, which may be just a matter of minutes, tell us a little bit about the wide receiver core for Oklahoma, because chances are they're going to have a banner day themselves. 4 receivers on the Sooners are averaging over 20 yards per catch, led by C.D. Lamb, but also a true freshman in Jadon Haselwood, who was a 5-star recruit out of the state of Georgia. to say that it was a big deal that the Sooners got him in the first place, but got him away from Georgia, where he had previously been committed and flipped, and Auburn, frankly, what really, really felt like it was going to land him. This is one of the better freshman receivers in the country. He is quickly making an impact. Tell us a little bit about that wide receiver core.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it starts with CeeDee Lamb. He is probably one of the best receivers in college football. He's a junior, but is, very likely to enter the NFL draft after this season. In fact, I would say that barring something insane, he will definitely enter the NFL draft, and he very well could be a first-round pick. But yeah, Jaden Hazelwood. But here's the crazy thing about that: Jaden Hazelwood looks great, and he is obviously a very talented player who I think will end up being one of the premier players on this offense. But he's one of three five-star receivers that you've signed in 2019. I mean, Trajan Bridges and Theo Weiss were also five-star receivers that are there, that also enrolled early in the spring. I mean, they sort of have an embarrassment of riches there at receiver. They're very talented there. But yeah, I mean, of the three, Hazelwood is the one who seems to sort of be the most ready to contribute. But all three of them are playing, and then they've got a couple of really, really good tight ends who have been very big contributors the last couple of years, Grant Calcaterra and Lee Morris. I mean, they've just got a lot of talent at those positions. And it's not surprising, given the numbers that they've put up, that they would. I mean, and then you look at they're able to recruit these guys because of what guys have done in the past. You look at what Marquise Brown did in his first NFL game last weekend for the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, these guys, Oklahoma has a lot to pitch to wide receivers on the recruiting trail.
What can you say about the state of the Sooners defense? Obviously, there's a change in coordinator. So, again, when Pac-12 fans are going to be watching this, one of the things that fans want to watch is, especially around here in Eugene, Chip Kelly's vaunted offense. Though down at UCLA, it's been anything but vaunted. It's been atrocious. And Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Joshua Kelly, who was one of the more productive backs in this league, but missed the opener, hasn't done much. Thompson-Robinson's been a disaster so far this season. They're playing an Oklahoma defense that it's a lot of different names out there compared to the last couple of years, and it's a different scheme. What will be the challenge for the UCLA offense in facing this Oklahoma defense? Who are some of these guys that fans will be watching on Saturday?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, Oklahoma's defense was one of the worst in the country last year by any statistical measure. And so Alex Grinch taking over, a guy who really emphasizes takeaways, speed, aggression, unpredictability on that side of the ball. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Ronnie Perkins, the defensive end, is someone who's kind of shown flashes of potentially being a real difference maker. Kenneth Murray, the middle linebacker, has started every game of his OU career. He came in as a true freshman and has started at middle linebacker ever since. And, he's made a lot of tackles but made a lot of mistakes too, and he finally is starting to sort of look like a legitimate big-time linebacker, over these first couple of games. The secondary is obviously a big question mark, as it has been for many years with Oklahoma. But, the player that I think will probably get the most attention on Saturday is Buki Radley-Hiles. He was a five-star DB out of originally from Inglewood, California, considered going to UCLA. Had a really rough true freshman season. He started 11 games last year. A lot of people sort of pinned their hopes on him, and he did not have a very good freshman year. But in the most recent game, it was against South Dakota. That cannot be overstated that it was against South Dakota. But he had a pick six. He had a fumble recovery, and he's coming home to his hometown for this game. So I think he's a guy that's going to get a lot of attention on Saturday.
Jason, and we're chatting with Jason Kersey of The Athletic. He covers Oklahoma. Again, follow him on Twitter at Jason Kersey. That's Kersey. How have the Sooners spoken of UCLA in this week leading up to this? Because, and obviously UCLA has started off in about as disastrous a fashion as one can imagine. They're 0-2. They just lost to San Diego State. They're giving away tickets, 4 to a season ticket holder who bothered to show up to last week's monstrosity. They're having players-only meetings already. Chip Kelly's facing questions from every which direction. So all the noise are surrounding the Bruins right now is incredibly negative. And obviously the Sooners are a top 5 team. How have they, and they beat the heck out of them last year, how have they spoken of this matchup? I don't want to say that they're overlooking, but or anything like that, but how have they spoken to this? Because this is a defense, as you mentioned, that is looking to improve in a big way compared to last year. How have they been talking about this weekend's game?
I mean, they're saying the right things. These guys aren't really trash talkers too much. I mean, they talk about how, they see talent out there, how, this is the team that is really going to have a lot to prove, that they're going to really, give OU their best shot. I mean, it's just the typical things that you're hearing, that you typically hear. I mean, they're not going to come out and say what they probably really think, which is this team is terrible. I mean, I think anybody can see that has watched them for the first 2 weeks. But, I mean, they do have some talent. They do have this game in their home stadium, and they do have Chip Kelly. I mean, Chip Kelly is still a very obviously an offensive genius, and we haven't seen much of that this year. But I certainly think that those are things that they keep in mind. I mean, I don't really recall hearing much trash talk during my time on the OU beat. Those guys typically are pretty well told not to do that.
Lastly, Jason, we'll get you out of here on this. Obviously, again, I'm with you. The outcome is a foregone conclusion. Again, this is a nearly 3+, I think it's almost 4+ touchdown line, and I'm not sure if you set it at 40 if I still wouldn't take the Sooners to cover. So let's get past the outcome itself of who wins and loses. Would there be a final score or a statistic that would have to happen that would even give you pause as to Oklahoma's chances as to reaching the college football playoff? Is there anything that could happen on Saturday in the realistic world that could even make you doubt for a second that this team is going to be a major contender? Is there something that could happen, again, outside of injury or something completely ridiculous? But I mean, if they turn the ball over a whole ton or something, like, is there a defensive number? Is there turnovers that would make you go, man, that might be a problem? Or is this just so lopsided that there's just no way?
Well, I mean, it is lopsided. I mean, OU's going to win the game. I don't really know. I can't really envision a scenario where they actually lose. I think that the things that would make you question things are if UCLA comes out and puts up a lot of points or a lot of yards. I mean, here's the thing. Even if they do that, OU's going to outscore them. I'm certain of that. But if that defense starts to show cracks, if they give up a bunch of yards, if we start seeing big plays pile on top of big plays the way that they have in the past, those are the little signs that I would look at. I mean, I don't really think anything offensively that I can conceive of would happen to where I would question how good they are offensively. If UCLA comes out in this game and piles on the points, piles on the yardage, embarrasses them, if they don't get any takeaways, those are the sorts of things that I would start to maybe think, maybe this defense isn't quite as improved as we maybe think it is.
Appreciate you, Jason. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, guys.
You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. We thank Jason Kersey for joining us to give us a little bit of a rundown on Oklahoma because, as I say, I know that fans will be watching elsewhere in the Pac-12 on Saturday, and when Oklahoma and UCLA are playing, you're probably going to tune in, at least to the end of the first quarter, because at that point I figure it'll be 24-0, and, then you can turn away. But you're going to be watching because, let's face it, there's not a whole lot of other games of huge ilk. This is weekend, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, from what I was seeing last night from some folks. This weekend does not feature any games featuring two ranked teams. So there's just not a lot of uber appeal by way of monumentally big games on paper. Now, that doesn't say that there aren't any that are any good. I'm just talking about as far as two ranked teams. Now, there are other games, like Arizona State at Michigan State will be a pretty big deal. But it's just that Arizona State isn't ranked right now. So that's all. But that actually, frankly, is a bigger game than the Oklahoma-UCLA game because.
Well, I don't know. After the way they played against Sacramento State,
quite frankly, it would be more surprising to me if there isn't a major record broken by Oklahoma's offense in that game than if they don't cover by an enormous margin. It's less about winning or even covering. It's more about, is Jalen Hurts going to put up 7 touchdowns?
Okay.
Or is a wide receiver going to have 250 or 300 yards receiving or something?
So here's something crazy that I'm going to throw out there because I'm good at that. If Oklahoma just obliterates UCLA, I mean, we're talking like, Oregon, Nevada type score here.
Sure. Which is entirely possible. It could very well be like 63-10.
Does it cost Chip his job?
No.
Okay. Why?
Not now.
Why not?
What, in a week? They're going to come back on Monday and say, sorry, no, you got to go.
Well, they could come back and say, okay, after the first 3 games of this season, you've shown no improvement whatsoever.
No.
Okay.
No. I think the buyout's just probably going to be too ridiculous. No. Now, I'm not telling you can't go somebody else. Like anybody, I think that, one, look, let's face it, Chip has never ever faced this level of just pure awfulness. At the NFL, it's different. Okay, I know he wasn't very good with the Niners, but the Niners were a rough organization at that point.
He was kind of sabotaged there.
That was a tough spot in a lot of ways. But he didn't experience this level of just complete awfulness with the Eagles, and certainly never here with New Hampshire. So to have this hanging around your neck, and like I say, players-only meetings already happening, and losing to San Diego State, and all, I mean, there is no NFL equivalent of losing to at home to San Diego State. Okay, there is none, because literally, no, there is none, because even you could say at the time, had he lost to a atrocious Browns team or something, they'd be like, yeah, but they're still a pro organization. there's still players who were drafted or paid millions of dollars on that team. There is virtually nobody on San Diego State who's going to make it to the NFL, okay? Nobody. So, no, there is no equivalent of that. I think, could you see some kind of change if it were to be that scale of atrocious, which, again, is totally inside the ballpark of possibility? Could you see some kind of change? Yeah, some. What? I don't know. I can't speak from here as to the job security of certain assistants or something. But like anybody, all coaches are about self-preservation, and I think Chip may be forced to consider throwing somebody else to the Sharks so as not to get eaten, because this is going to be rough. I really do. I think this weekend, I think they could break the scoreboard at the Rose Bowl. I really do. Unless Lincoln Riley has a particular place in his heart for somebody or someone or something, I cannot imagine them letting up. I really can't. Look, they play, Jason mentioned, Oklahoma has a ton of major marquee non-conference games scheduled for the next, 20 years. This is the only one in the Pac-12 right now on paper.
And they've got to get a good showing for their case for the playoffs.
Because you know that there are a lot of just atrocious defenses in the Big 12 that they're going to light up. There are some that are pretty good. I'm not going to tell you that they're all awful, but a good number of them are pretty awful. So they're going to put up some bonkers numbers as usual, but there are people out there nationally who have no idea how bad UCLA is. They may learn it very quickly on Saturday, but there are people nationally who just be like, oh, well, they put up 50-some-odd points in UCLA, and people will be like, yeah, you didn't know that UCLA has one atrocious. But be that as it may, no, I think there's something to be said for recruiting purposes for Oklahoma. If it is trying to get anywhere into the LA area just to get the occasional guy, as Jason mentioned, they have a guy in particular who's from the area who will probably look to have a pretty big day. It matters. So, anywho, we will see with that game in particular. But, I think it could be a pretty rough run for Chip Kelly and the Bruins on Saturday. Elsewhere in the state of California, the big news of the day, and literally just happened minutes ago. So, the California State Assembly had passed the Fair Pay to Play Act, which is basically, long story short, without getting into all of the nuance and et cetera, it's the state bill that, should it become law, would enable college athletes in the state of California to be able to receive compensation for what is known as name, image, and likeness, NIL. Okay. Now, the state Senate, the California State Senate, had passed it. There were some amendments and revisions to the bill that the Assembly passed, so it had to go back to the Senate. Mere minutes ago, while we were talking to Jason Kersey, the California State Senate approved the revised bill. All of these things were done unanimously, by the way. So,
wow.
It is now headed to California Governor Newsom's desk. He has, I believe it is 30 days to sign or not sign. The NCAA has asked California not to pass this bill, which, by the way, would not go into effect until 2023. So this is not something that's coming in a matter of minutes, okay? It's not. It wouldn't come even next year. It would be several years down the road so that there would be all this kind of ample time. There's a lot of political posturing of it. We're not going to do all the nuance and specifics because it is a lot of political posturing on both sides by the NCAA, who cannot do anything to look anything less than awful in anything that it does here, quite frankly, and it should in a lot of ways. However, the NCAA does have previously, for several months now, a working group set that is analyzing and looking into the name, image, and likeness issue. And they are expected to have conclusions and a report completed and available in October. So based on that group's findings, recommendations, and etc., it would then have to go to votes and create proposals and stuff. So bottom line, there's a whole legislative process that are going within the NCAA, which is why the NCAA is asking California not to pass this bill sometime in the next 30 days because they may not have their report just yet, first and foremost. But California isn't going to care about that, nor should it. Because, quite frankly, by the time the NCAA acts, which will happen well before 2023, then California's bill could just be a moot point. The law, if it becomes a law, could become a moot point. And it could just say, all right, throw the law out. Don't worry about it. Or it could keep it on the books and say, no, we're just making sure that the NCAA's new regulation is going to be just fine. Thank you very much. This is exactly where we think it has to head. And we're going to stand by the players who are at our colleges. And that's the way it goes. But again, the association is open to it. That's what they're looking into. The chair of the NCAA Board of Governors is Michael Drake, who's also the president of Ohio State University. He told ESPN that the NCAA is, quote, working actively to look at ways to modernize its approach to name, image, and likeness restrictions. That's going on nationally. It has been for a while. It will continue to. But because that literally just passed, we mention it now.
This is the James Crepea Show.
We've got a blind date with destiny.
And it looks like she's ordered the lobster.
Oregonian columnist James Crepea.
I had some crackpot dynamite reporter at the first press conference ask me how in the heck we're going to possibly throw the ball when they keep a lid on their covers and who's the best pass rusher you've ever played against.
We're not the favorites. We're the other guys.
KORE 1050 and 95.7. Fox Sports Eugene. Here is the James Crepea Show, presented by Dairy Mart.
And we now welcome to the program our second guest of the day. This is Cyd Zeigler of Outsports. He wrote a story today on the re-education of UC Irvine men's basketball coach Russell Turner. Obviously, Oregon fans know Coach Turner quite well because UC Irvine's season ended against Oregon in the second round of the NCAA Tournament in San Jose last March. It was after that game where, in the post-game press conference, Coach Turner was asked about the post-game exchange that he had with then Oregon Ducks guard Louis King, and he explained what the post-game interaction and exchange was about because he had admitted to referring to Louis King as Louis Queen and double team Queen during the game and tried to pass it off in an explanation as an analogy to chess because Louis was so important to the Ducks squad. I and other reporters who were there in San Jose quickly jumped on that and said, oh, this is going to have some legs, and that's going to be a problem. And obviously it led to all kinds of blowback that Cyd details in his long piece today on Outsports with Russ Turner, speaking with him for the first time beyond those public apologies that came the day after. And we welcome Cyd to the program now. Welcome to the program, sir.
Well, I appreciate you circling back and talking about this. I imagine many fans have forgotten about it, but it's still important to talk about.
No question. No, it absolutely is. And as I say, to give fans who don't know always the inside the lines kind of framework that reporters deal with at the NCAA tournament and whatnot. So in the post game at San Jose, as they are at every NCAA men's and women's basketball tournament site, the locker rooms are open at the NCAA tournament, and beat reporters don't go always to the press conference. In fact, very rarely do we ever go to the press conference because we can get a transcript of the press conference. So, and the same player or players and coach come back to the locker room, and we want to talk to all the other players. So the locker room is what's more important. So all the Oregon reporters are in the Oregon locker room. When Dana Altman and I believe it was Paul White and maybe Peyton Pritchard went to the podium, and then they came back and we were talking to them. And UC Irvine at that point no longer mattered to us. So when they complete their time, we're walking out. I then find out UC Irvine and Russ Turner was up at the podium. Their players were done, and Turner made his remarks. I had not initially heard them live, but somebody who was sitting in the room came back in the work area and said, "Hey, did you hear what he just said? He said with Lewis and whatnot." And I mention all this, one, to give fans insight into how this all went down at that time. And this was a late game on a Sunday. But also because the reason why the Oregon reporters didn't ask Lewis King that night was because the locker room had already closed and the team was on its way out the door. We didn't know that Russ Turner had said what he had said because, one, we're on the opposite side of the court. We couldn't hear it during the game. And two, Oregon's availability was already wrapped up, so we couldn't talk to Lewis King for 5 days after. And at that point, there were these public apologies and everything else. So that's how this kind of all went down behind the scenes. But what Cyd Zeigler followed up on with Russ Turner was, obviously, there's not a lot of people who cover UC Irvine on a daily basis. And beyond the apologies, yeah, there was a whole lot of blowback, understandably and deservedly so, to Coach Turner for those remarks. He followed up and sat down with him for several hours. Walk me through a little bit, Sid, and the audience, a little bit of what that interview was like, what that exchange was like with Coach Turner. I know you mentioned in the story that, one, it was at a panel that Outsports had put on in Los Angeles you had a short exchange with him there, but you sat with him for several hours.
Yeah, I first met him in June. This all happened mid to late March, whenever the second round of the tournament was, and I met him at an event we hosted at UCLA. We had a bunch of athletes and coaches who were gay and lesbian and transgender, just at a LA Pride event that we were hosting, that Outsports was hosting with UCLA and the Dodgers. And Russell Turner came and sat and listened. And after the transgender athlete talked about, and they talked about exclusion from sports and gender issues and the power of language, Russ was just kind of hanging out in the back of the room. I think maybe he was checking his phone or something. And I just went up to him and I said, I really appreciate you being here. It says a lot that you would want to engage. And he couldn't speak for the first, probably 15, 20 seconds. He and I just stood there silently, and his lip was quivering and tears were welling in his eyes, and he was very clearly upset. And I think listening to those athletes talk about what it's like being LGBTQ in sports, and having listened to so many people talk about that and gender issues, he just really became present with the power of his language and how he had failed. And we talked for a couple of minutes then, and I got a phone call maybe a month later from his publicist, not publicist, but just a guy kind of helping him navigate this, mostly privately, saying, "Do you want to interview him? He wants to talk to you." So I went down to his office at UC Irvine, very humble office, as I wrote in the piece, and we had a very, I wouldn't say it was a tough 2-hour conversation, but he was emotional throughout, and he was emotional mostly when he talked about other people explaining to him how he had hurt them or how he had just screwed up. And to me, what I tried to impart in the piece is that this is a good person who didn't even know that he didn't know this was a problem. I mean, when I remember seeing the press conference and thinking he was so proud of what he had done, calling King a queen, he had no idea what he had done. And I think, again, if you read the piece, it's evident that that was the case. So, he's been a total open book. He hasn't hidden anything from me. He's been very easy to work with, and it's obvious, talking not just to him but other people who have talked to him or know him, that he's a guy worth investing in, and this may have cost him a big time D1 job, and I would certainly, if somebody from a big power conference came to me and said, "Do you think we can trust this guy on this issue?" I would say, yeah. I think the last guy on earth who's going to make this mistake ever again is this guy.
No, that's a fair point. Again, to remind fans, Oregon fans in particular, because this did involve obviously an Oregon player and an Oregon game. This was a late West Coast game on a Sunday night, and this was post-game. So I can tell you exactly what time I published the story, just to give people by frame of reference here. Because I went back and looked, because, yes, USA Today, you mentioned in your story, USA Today wrote it as well. I had actually beaten them only by probably a half hour, but I had published it at 12:45. It was 12:47 a.m. when I posted this story, and USA Today also was, I think, at like 1:25 in the morning. So that was in the written word. At first, it was bad enough, and you're absolutely right. He was, frankly, quite proud of what he had said, and obviously didn't. And you mentioned in the piece. Didn't think about it at all at that time afterward that night, because the follow-up question of, was that early in the game when you called him that? And this is the exact line in the transcript. In the first half, they're right in front of us, so I got a voice. I can make the offensive team hear me, so I utilize my voice the best I can to help my team. He did not think at all that what he was doing or saying was going to be problematic from a public relations standpoint whatsoever. He thought it was merely something that was going on during the game, and that using that terminology was perfectly acceptable, and so be it. But as you say in detail in the piece, Sid, there is clearly a root issue here of whether the explanation with the chess thing was kind of outrageous. Let's be realistic. There's a reason why you felt like you were getting underneath someone's skin and referring to them as queen, and it wasn't a play on words on his last name, Louis King, or Louis the King, as Bill Walton had referred to him during the telecast the game before, or that it was having anything to do with chess. There was a reason why you felt this was going to get underneath someone's skin, and yet afterward he was very proud about the way in which he went about that. But it quickly turned, and you examine in that piece. How sincere was Russ Turner coming off? And like I say, you sat with him for a number of hours. How sincere was he coming off in this conversation about all this and looking back at all this?
Really sincere. And I talked to Jason Collins, who has known Coach Turner for 20 years, played for him at Stanford. And Jason said the same thing. This is just a guy who didn't even know what he didn't know. And I talked in the piece, he knew the slurs not to say. He has LGBTQ people in his family. He respects women. He loves the women in his life. This idea to him that this word could be taken and turned into an issue of misogyny and homophobia and sexism, it was just so foreign to him. Even when somebody pointed it out, they're like, give me a break. I remember back in 2011, Kobe Bryant used an anti-gay slur, called a referee an anti-gay slur. And Kobe Bryant's like, give me a break. I know gay people. I like gay people. I don't even mean it that a gay thing. He didn't even know that this slur that no one would ever use was problematic, or that it was homophobic, or that it had a root in attacking gay men. And Kobe Bryant went and listened and learned and has come to be a pretty decent supporter of the gay community. And I think that all of us have these things. All of us have words. I've used words and I had no idea what the root was. Zero. And I listen and I learn and I stop using the word. And Coach Turner has seemed every moment deeply honest and sincere, not just in his regret for doing this, but his regret that he didn't understand it, the pain that he brought people. He went and met with LGBTQ students, coaches in his department. This is not a guy who just has been trying to check some boxes to put this behind him. This is a guy who actually wants to fix it, and it feels like that's what he's doing.
And we're chatting with Cyd Zeigler of Outsports. Again, he wrote a piece today on the re-education of Coach Russell Turner, that being the men's basketball coach at UC Irvine, obviously involved in the exchange with then Oregon Ducks basketball player Louis King back in the NCAA tournament last March, referring to King as Louis Queen or Louis the Queen during the game. And that obviously drawing a lot of criticism in the hours thereafter, and mainly the day after, at that point on Monday, when everybody woke up and was able to see exactly what he had said. I, among others, quickly realizing that was going to be really problematic for Coach Turner. But what Cyd did in following up, and as he mentioned here, yes, the Coach Turner has met with a good number of people at UC Irvine. And this is obviously something that here in covering Oregon, I'm not going to spend the time to follow through on what happened at UC Irvine the day-to-day, but understanding that there was obviously going to be a lot of blowback. In your conversations with Turner, Cyd, was there any exchange that he referred to specifically, because there were so many, as you detailed, that he did have, any that stuck with him particularly or stuck out by way of just the impact? As you mentioned, he met with groups of students, he met with other coaches and faculty members and these things. Was there anything that he mentioned in conversations with you that really stuck out from those one-on-one conversations?
Well, the one thing that I remember he talked at length about was about a month later, a women's group on campus organized a Take Back the Night event, candlelight march, a bunch of speakers, survivors of sexual assault. And he brought his team there. And he said there were not a lot of men. And there certainly were not a lot of 6'6", 7-foot men. And he said we stood out. And he talked about listening to these women and the power of language and the problematic issues of misogyny in sports and among men. And he said at one point, one of the women got up and told a story of being sexually assaulted by an athlete at UC Irvine. And he said it just, even though what he did obviously is not remotely sexual assault, hearing hearing the words of these victims of misogyny and that was particularly powerful. That hit home to him, that the stuff that he does has an impact on the men he coaches and the women in their lives. And, you know, bringing his team, I think he's going to continue to do things like that. It's not something that most Division I basketball coaches are bringing their teams to, but I think the kind of thing he's going to continue doing, because it opened his eyes to how disconnected he as a coach and his team can get from the campus around them.
And certainly, again, I recommend folks to read the piece on Outsports that Cyd Zeigler did today with chronicling the background here in the aftermath with everything with Russell Turner, the coach at UC Irvine. I do recommend, again, Do check it out on Outsports. We thank you, Cyd, for joining the show, and thank you for doing the piece ultimately, because I think of all the publications, yours is certainly the one that carries the most weight and credibility in tackling and addressing these issues. And these are important issues, particularly in sport. And this was a perfect instance to examine what somebody was doing afterwards. So we thank you for joining the show, and thank you for the work you do.
I hope the boys and men's coaches who are listening to your show will go read the piece and learn from Coach Turner, not just to do if you make a mistake, but what you can do to prevent yourself from making a mistake like this.
Well said, and thank you again so much. Cyd Zeigler of Outsports, you're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. For those of you who were waiting and questioning and eager, when were we going to give away the pair of tickets to Oregon State and Cal Poly on Saturday? Your answer would be right now. So the fifth caller in the Davis Roofing Hotline at 541-343-KORE. Give us a call, and you will win the pair of tickets along with the parking pass to Saturday's game for Oregon State and Cal Poly. Again, give us a call. Davis Roofing Hotline, 541-343-5673. Fifth caller wins the pair of tickets and the parking pass to Saturday's game. Back to the Ducks and the football Ducks. We spoke with Mario and Andy Avalos today, along with a couple of defenders. And speaking, and we'll shift gears toward the weekend game. Obviously, this is not exactly this isn't Auburn. This is not a ranked opponent in the FBS. They are ranked in the FCS. So, again, Montana, let's put it this way. It's not a abysmal FCS opponent. It's not a powerhouse by any stretch of the imagination, but they're a respectable team at the level in which they play. And Mario has been very complimentary of Montana this week. Very complimentary. And Andy Avalos spoke about them as well. Let's hear what Mario had to say about the Montana offense and their senior quarterback, Dalton Sneed, after this morning's practice.
He throws the ball really well. He can make all the throws. He's good in the quick game. He's been very good at dissecting coverages. He's very decisive. He's throwing the balls out quick, very efficient, accurate. And then when it's not there, he can extend plays and he can make things happen with his feet as well. Real impressed with him. And his receivers are really good players as well. And it's not just a slot guy that has all the passing records. He's right on the brink of breaking those, but outside, they're fast, they're athletic, they're long, big guys that go up and make some really good 50-50 opportunities go their way. Tight end-wise, they play with a couple of them, and they're all good blockers, and they all could run routes really well. So all in all, you look at a team that offensively, there's a reason they're scoring that many points. Yeah, they execute well and everything else, but they have a lot of talent. And those guys up front, they're tough, they're organized, they're well coached. They gel together nicely, and so far they're off to a great start this season.
And Andy Avalos also spoke about, in particular, the quarterback and wide receiver tandems that Montana has. Here's what he had to say.
Very talented in terms of his arm strength. He gets the ball in the tight windows. He's got some big, talented wide receivers on the outside, good slot receivers inside, good route runners. Once again, very talented arm and a guy that's very capable of running. He's experienced in the way that he's played major football and played really good football on different levels.
And that is the key for Dalton Sneed here for fans who will be obviously watching on Saturday night when Montana comes to Autzen is, yes, Dalton Sneed, yes, he is obviously an FCS quarterback and a very productive one at that. But he did originally start off at UNLV. So bear in mind that, no, I'm not going to make UNLV to be this massive powerhouse. Obviously, it has had times in its history that's been pretty good. It's obviously going through quite the dry spell at the moment. But Sneed's career did begin at UNLV. Yes, he's now at Montana and has been very, very productive for them. So this is a quarterback who not only can throw, he absolutely is going to quite a bit. Because through 2 games, including a game where they just scored over 60 points, again, I understand the level of competition. I'm talking about just the potency of that offense. Dalton Sneed has thrown for nearly 700 yards. With 4 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, where the lead running back has 136 rushing yards. And second is him with 38. So the point is this is a offense that is 70-30 pass by means of production right now. And if you break down on the number of passes to runs. It's 92 total passes to 77 runs. And obviously there's some in there that are sacks and other things. So point is, yes, this is a team that is going to look to get a lot of yards through the air while the game is competitive. When Oregon's up by bunches, they are not exactly going to go, oh, no, we have to abandon what we do in order to pass more. No. Montana passes to begin with and passes a lot. As I say, Dalton Sneed, 61 of 90. That is 67.8%, 696 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks this season. He was quite productive last season as well. We will go over Sneed and Montana's receiver core more at length coming up in a few minutes with Frank Gogola of the Missoulain, who will detail for us a few more things. But again, that's what Mario and Andy Avalos had to say about their offense as a whole, and with Sneed in particular, mentioning the outside receivers. So these are bigger bodies, and not just bigger for FCS. No, these are legitimately bigger bodies. I'm not going to tell you that Thomas Graham Jr. or Diamador Lenore are going to face a particularly monumental task here. I'm not building Montana out to be something it's not. I just want to reiterate that this is a team that does have some firepower, some skill, and is able to play. This is not an FCS opponent where you just say, well, this one's going to be over in a matter of minutes. I mean, there are certain, let's put it this way, there are certain FCS teams that, all right, let's get past the fact that if they're playing Oregon, and Oregon's a top 15 team right now and could prove to be much higher than that. There are FCS teams every year that can manage to beat FBS teams. If it's the right matchup at the right time, it can absolutely go that way. Montana is a team that, quite frankly, if it were playing several of the bottom-tier Pac-12 teams, very well would not only be competitive, probably would stand a pretty good chance at picking off one or two. And I don't think you have to be a genius to figure out which one or two I'm referring to. Now, Oregon isn't one of them, but there are a couple of bottom feeders in this league that Montana would give a real run for its money, to say the least. So, yes, this team does have some firepower, does have some skill. I'm not telling you that it's going to be particularly competitive for the Ducks. I'm just telling you that they are a legitimately potent offense. Their outside receivers, their two best ones, are 6'3", 190 and 6'4", 201. For that height, perhaps a little bit undersized, a little bit. And Dalton Sneed is still 6'1", 216. So, again, a little bit undersized. But you're talking about FCS players. So, yes, by definition, they're probably a little undersized. But that's your major firepower. Then the slot receiver is the guy who's racking up all these yards, Jerry Louis McGee, 5'9", 171. But you're talking about major skill position players. The most productive players on this offense are a redshirt senior quarterback, a redshirt senior slot receiver who's going to break the Montana program record for receptions, and 2 outside receivers who are redshirt juniors. This is not a team that is loaded with a whole bunch of freshmen coming in here looking to take a whooping by 70. This is a team that's used to having success at the level that they play at, has some firepower, knows their offense, and the defense isn't half bad either. So again, for their level of play, they are a more than respectable opponent. I'm not telling you that it's going to be a competitive game. I'm just telling you that they are a more than respectable opponent that does have some firepower. So that's why Mario Cristobal and Andy Avalos have been so complimentary of Montana this week. And I would pay a good bit of attention to the slot receiver in particular because, again, that's an area that this is a young man who's got some real speed. We'll get into that more coming up with Frank Gogola of the Missoulain. You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. And we now welcome on Montana beat reporter for the Missoulain and 406mtsports.com, Mr. Frank Gogola. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with Dalton Sneed. This is a fifth-year senior quarterback who started his career at UNLV, ends up in Montana, and has been quite productive for the Grizz. And obviously started this year just fine, nearly 700 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks. This is, I would imagine, the best and toughest secondary that Dalton Sneed will play in his career. What do you think he brings to the table, and how will he be able to test what will be the toughest test that he does have to play defensively?
Yes, I do agree. Their toughest test, and like you mentioned, he started out at UNLV, was recruited there by Bobby Houck and Tim Rosenbaugh, who are the head coach and offensive coordinator at Montana right now. So they have some built-in trust with him already. Transferred in last year, was the starter, ended up leading the team in rushing with over 700 yards, partly because of his dual threat ability, but they also were breaking in 4 new starters on the offensive line last year. So as that broke down, he had to scramble quite a bit. Coming into this year, he had worked on a lot more his footwork in the pocket, being able to step up in the pocket, keeping his eyes downfield, to be able to throw the ball more, not take as many hits, and just not get banged up as much, pretty much. And he does have a deep stable of wide receivers, so that's been a big boost for them, and that's something that I think they could end up having to rely on going up against a secondary as athletic and deep as Oregon's.
Tell us a little bit about that wide receiver core, Frank. Obviously, Samuel Acom is at or near the top by way of returners, but it is not just him. Again, this is really a three-headed monster, at least, for the Montana receiver core that will get to match up quite a bit with this Oregon secondary. So tell Ducks fans a little bit about each of these big 3 Montana receivers.
Yeah, so you start with Sammy Acom, who was a second-team all-conference guy last year. And, you know, from what some other coaches have said, he could be playing at the FBS level if he got recruited. The thing is, he's from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, so apparently not heavily recruited out of there in that area. But he's their main guy. He's the deep threat guy, long strides, good hands, and I think he ended up having 2 touchdown catches in each of the last 5 games last year. So he's the main guy, but it's not just him. You got a Samari Torrey, 6'3" junior, who some of the Oregon fans may know. He's from Portland area there, and did not get offered by Oregon, but ended up choosing the Grizz and had a breakout freshman season 2 years ago. Got lost in the shuffle a little bit last year, but he's really reemerged since the first day of fall camp, and he's shown it through 2 games already, going for about 150 receiving yards the first game and about 75 the second game. And then their slot receiver, Jerry Louis McGee, short, 5'9", 170-pound kid from Idaho who is 3 catches away from breaking the program's all-time receptions leader, or all-time receptions record. Also, this past game tied the school record of 3 punt return touchdowns. So it just brings a lot of speed and a lot of shiftiness and ability to make people miss. And you see that both in the return game and when they're throwing out to him on the flats, and they get some receivers blocking, and he's able to slip past guys and break off some big runs after the catch.
You mentioned Samari Torrey, and yes, from the Portland area out of Westview High School. Montana has 5 players from the state of Oregon. Many of them are either true or redshirt freshmen who aren't on the 2 deep, so not too many of them may necessarily get a chance to play on Saturday. For one, I'm not sure exactly what the size of the travel squad for the Grizz will be for this one, but if they do get a chance, certainly for those young men, it'll be a huge opportunity, but for just about all of them, because, again, this is not just the toughest opponent, but it'll be the biggest environment that most all of Montana's players will play in, unless they were on the team a couple of years ago who played at Washington, and obviously that was a very lopsided game. Frank, tell us a little bit about this. Is an offensive line that averages over 300 pounds, and not every FCS school can claim that. Generally speaking, FCS offensive linemen may be slightly undersized. This is still a Montana offensive line that does have some bulk. How formidable is this unit?
Well, they've put on, beefed up in the off season as, just get better durability, and they're deeper this year. That's for sure. They rotated some players in this past week as a sort of a challenge to see who would be the starters, because they actually have some depth this year added in. 2 junior college transfers who are expected to be competing for time, got back another player who had started 29 games before he ended up missing the last 3 games of last year. So it's a deeper unit and more experienced. And in this past game, they ended up shutting out North Alabama 45-0 in the second half. And afterwards, the North Alabama head coach said basically Montana's offensive line controlled the entire second half of the game, which is not something you would have thought or would have heard at all at any point last season.
Let's switch gears to the Montana defense, Frank, and we're chatting with Frank Gogola of the Missoula'n and 406mtsports.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Frank Gogola. That's Gogola. Let's switch gears to that defense, Frank. Dante Olson in particular is really the heart of that Montana defense. What does that young man bring to the field in this 3-3-5 defense?
Yeah, so he's the main guy that probably jumps out right away watching the defense. He's actually from Medford, Oregon out there, so it's a little excitement for him to go back and play closer to home there. He's everywhere on the field. It's pretty much the best way to say it. He led the FCS last season in total tackles during the regular season with 151 and finished third in voting for the Buck Buchanan Award, which is given to the best defensive player in the FCS. And even this year, he was on the Buckus Award going into the season, which is for the top defensive player in all of Division I, and he was the only FCS player to make that list. All the other players were FBS players. But, he's got great straight line speed. He's got speed going side to side. He just seems to weave his way through traffic to be able to make any tackle you need him to. And, he can beat some blocks with his hands, but he can also slip past guys if need to.
Let's talk about what exactly is the gauge here, because I know Coach Houck had said earlier in the week at the press conference, somebody asked him what is the gauge for success for Montana in this one, and his response was quite simply winning. Now, on one hand, I can't really blame him, like what exactly is he supposed to say there, but at the same time, we do live in the real world. What in your mind is success for Montana in this one?
Yeah, and that's he's pretty confident in at least saying that. I would think the main thing for them is, one, with conference play coming up and higher expectations for them, is you want to get out of there injury-free. So I'd say that's the main thing. Just in my opinion, I'd say after looking at what Oregon did to Nevada last week in that 77-6 game, I would think if Montana can hold Oregon to fewer than 77 points, and if they could score more than 6 points, I think that could end up being some sort of win for them. Although I know just Coach Houck is not going to take away any moral victories, I would say. But that would be one of the main things I would say. So.
Yeah, I would think that if I were Montana in this one, again, this is not disparaging in any way. It's just it's the reality of the situation. It's not just FBS versus FCS. This is top 15 with a Heisman contending quarterback and perhaps the best offensive line in the country, with a defense that has currently been playing with its hair on fire the first 2 games and holding a couple opponents under 200 yards passing. If Montana were able to go out, frankly, and score a couple of touchdowns, it would be monumental by way of offense against this Oregon defense, the way it's playing at the moment. That would be, to me, I realize, nobody in the Montana program is going to come away walking out going, oh boy, well, we lost by 40, but at least we scored a couple of touchdowns. But to me, I think I think success has to be gauged, yes, first and foremost with injuries, and second, if they were to actually have production by way on the scoreboard. I don't care who's on the field. you're talking about players, freshman players on this Oregon defense who are very highly touted recruits, who took pride in last week in keeping Nevada out of the end zone. If Montana were to score a couple of touchdowns, that would mean a whole lot to this Oregon defense. I would think it would matter a whole lot to Montana as well. With that said, Frank, how do you see this one playing out?
Well, I would hope that it would be a competitive game, although I am not expecting that necessarily. Bobby Hauck always preaches just having good attitude and good effort, so I think one thing would be to see if they can actually play with that for a full 60 minutes, especially if they get down big, multiple scores. And I'm curious with Oregon playing Stanford next week, if they get up big enough, if they start to rest some of their starters and keep them healthy and fresh for that big conference game. So I think I ended up having Oregon winning 49-17, and maybe Montana gets something in with some trick plays or have some success on special teams, or just to get some short fields that they have to drive.
All right, so that would be covering the spread at the moment. And I'll tell you this, if it's 17, Frank, there are going to be some defensive coaches and players who are not going to walk out of Autzen very happy. So it could be the walk-ons out there. And frankly, I think Andy Avalos will be fuming mad if Montana scores 17 points. I can almost guarantee that. So if that were to come to fruition, boy, that might not go over so well. At least in these parts of Montana, they may throw a parade. But I can understand it. Well, look forward to seeing you on Saturday, and certainly folks can check out, again, Frank's work at 406mtsports.com and follow him on Twitter at Frank Gogola. That's Gogola. Thanks again for joining us, Frank.
All right, thank you.
You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. And we thank our various guests for joining the program today. First, Jason Kersey of The Athletic, covering Oklahoma, weighing in on Saturday's game with Oklahoma and UCLA. Cyd Zeigler of Outsports doing the piece on UC Irvine coach Russ Turner and his comments from the game between UC Irvine and Oregon in the second round regarding Lewis King. That drew a lot of criticism at the time, but following through and speaking with Turner more recently into the fallout of everything there. And then just Frank Gogola covering Montana for the Missoulian and giving us some further insight on the Grizz as they prepare to take on the Ducks on Saturday night. Elsewhere in the college sports world, one of the bigger news items of the day being that T. Boone Pickens, the philanthropist, oil man, energy man, really just gazillionaire, passed away today at 91. He obviously being a monumentally enormous supporter of Oklahoma State athletics over the years. He was the second biggest donor to any institution in the country, only to Phil Knight in Oregon. So again, a man who had given much, not only of his fortune, but much of his life to the benefit of Oklahoma State University and Oklahoma State University athletics. Boone Pickens passing away at 91 today. Elsewhere in the sports world, as you again have heard, undoubtedly over the last 24 hours, the news coming out just at the very, very end of yesterday's program regarding, yet again, with Antonio Brown, but this of something of actual consequence and not a helmet, or the ridiculousness of his feet, or even the preposterousness of the move he was trying to set up to get out of Oakland and then ultimately with New England. No, this actually of real seriousness. Obviously, if you somehow missed this, yes, Antonio Brown has been accused in a civil lawsuit by a former trainer of sexual assault and rape allegations. Now, these allegations were not reported to police at the alleged locations that they took place, but there are emails that Antonio Brown sent to this woman that were submitted in the civil lawsuit that to say that they don't come off well is to put it mildly. Now, Brown's lawyers have addressed this and put out a statement basically admitting that there was a sexual relationship between the two, but they insist it was consensual and say that Antonio Brown has every intention of fighting this and have even raised the specter of countersuing for extortion. So that coming from his lawyers. Drew Rosenhaus, his agent, speaking to various outlets, saying that they were aware of the possibility of this lawsuit coming up. Now that obviously then raises the question of, oh, really? Well, when were you aware? Were you aware while he was with the Raiders? Were you aware after he was with the Raiders, but before he signed with the Patriots, albeit that was a very narrow window? When were you aware? Because basically, did the Patriots know this when they signed him is now the new question in this entire saga. Having said that, Antonio Brown was with the New England Patriots today. He was at practice with the Patriots today, wearing, albeit a temporary number 1 practice jersey. The Patriots have not officially designated him a number as of yet. The NFL has come out and said that they will be investigating. That is basically the statement that the Patriots have put out as well, that the organization takes accusations such as this very seriously, etc., but with the NFL indicating that they will investigate, they are going to be basically refraining from further comment. Nobody with the Patriots addressing the situation, whether that being Bill Belichick or Tom Brady or other members of the organization, not really weighing in much at all, as they shouldn't, other than say, either to the organization's statements or to the league, or Tom Brady flat out just saying no today. Asked if he had any comment on anything, he just said no. Team captain Matthew Slater saying, I certainly don't want to minimize the seriousness of a situation like this, very sensitive matter. I don't want to minimize it at all. But that being said, I certainly don't think that I should be speaking on it or I'm qualified to speak on it because I don't have any knowledge of the situation. So, again, all understandable as to how and why the Patriots are currently handling it as of today. We will see what exactly happens next in this ongoing saga that now has something of quite serious nature. Again, everything else with Antonio Brown was either just noise or ridiculous or preposterous or just downright bad. But quite frankly, nobody really cared what helmet he wore other than him, or that his feet were going through the frostbite issue that he obviously have long since healed up from other than him, or whether he played for the Raiders or not, quite frankly, or if he ends up playing for the Patriots. But now there is a very serious accusation put forth. Now, again, you can presume that the man is innocent until proven guilty, and obviously there's no criminal complaints here, and police were not made aware. So this is now just a civil accusation, however, a very, very serious civil accusation, and there will be plenty of people who have weighed in already about the how and why, about why a alleged victim may not go to police, may not initially report things, and etc. So we're not going to go into all of those things here because, quite frankly, it would take unbelievable sums of time, and it has already taken so much time and air in the sports world talking about Antonio Brown. I am not minimizing this by any stretch of the imagination. I am just sick about talking about this man already. Elsewhere in the sports world, this story coming up in the last roughly half hour or so, the New York Times reporting that Justify, the horse that won the Triple Crown in 2018, had actually failed a drug test in California prior to the running of any of the Triple Crown races. That protocol was not followed. The rules were not followed, and obviously Justify went on to then win the Triple Crown, and his owners sold his breeding rights for $60 million. Ooh. The New York Times reporting, according to documents, that, again, protocol was not followed following a failed drug test. This is per the New York Times, instead of the failed drug test causing a speedy disqualification, the California Horse Racing Board took more than a month to confirm the results. Then, instead of filing a public complaint, as it usually does, the board made a series of decisions behind closed doors as it moved to drop the case and lighten the penalty for any horse found to have the banned substance that Justify tested positive for in its system.
So do we put an asterisk by this?
Well, that is what the New York Times raises in its questioning and reporting of this. Basically, quite literally, one of the tweets was, does this Triple Crown now deserve a triple asterisk because this is of this failed drug test for the horse prior to the running of the Triple Crown that year. So again, check that story on the New York Times and nytimes.com. Some fine reporting there from Joe Drape of the New York Times has chronicled horse racing for many, many, many years. I've not even had a chance, quite frankly, to read the full story because it's rather lengthy, but suffice to say, quite a bit of detail in there. Check that out. On tomorrow's show, we'll welcome Theo Lawson back to the program as Washington State prepares to take on Houston on Friday, and Miles Simmons covers the Raiders for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. Hit the lights and lock the doors.